Hi. So, recording has started and I will start also. Welcome everyone to our event. Can we get an hello in the chat? And maybe where are you from? What time is it? So I say good morning. What do you say? Good evening. And what's the middle thing? I always forget. What do you say there? Hello. Yes. So welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon. Is there a phrase for noon actually? I always wonder. So good noon. It's not something you would say.
Yeah, good noon is also there. Yeah.
Yeah. From Köln. Yeah, we have a lot of participants in the chat. Nice. I first want to introduce the panelists, and we will start with Maaret with the unspoken last name. She's a principal test engineer at Vaisala. Then we have Ben Dowen, or the full snack tester. He's a senior quality engineer at Ada Health. And we have Brijesh there, principal consultant at Infosys, also the CEO, chief enablement officer at the test chat community. And we also have Beth Marshall, senior quality engineer and also course tutor at Coders Guild. Welcome all the panelists. I think you're already unmuted. You can say hello also or wink in the chat so we know who you are.
Namaste, everyone.
Hello.
Okay, I'm a little bit sick, so maybe I have to mute myself to cough. So I hope Brijesh already said, yeah, I love talking, and I hope all the panelists do too. So I don't have to do a lot of talking here. So our topic today is test automation, friend or foe, and I hope to get some spicy discussions for all our panelists. And also in the chat, I encourage everyone to participate in discussions in the chat. If there are questions coming from the chat to our panelists that are relevant to our topic here and not too specific to one specific panelist, then I will Apurva will alert me and bring it here so I can ask or she can ask, so we can have a nice discussion and some interactive elements here. And first, I want to start with a little round here where I say, okay, test automation, and I saw a lot of discussion at LinkedIn, and that's why I asked this question, what is test automation? And there's one caveat here. Everybody of the panelists has to answer in one sentence. So don't go too broad. So what is test automation for you? And I will start with Maaret.
Having code doing something useful for testing.
Nice. Ben, will you go next?
Okay, so for me, it covers both support for exploratory testing and coded checks using a combination of tools to perform repeatable actions. I think that's part of the bit that's important for me.
Thank you. Beth?
I would say automation is not a silver bullet.
And lastly, Brijesh?
Automation is a way to add efficiency to your testing through code.
Thank you. Well, some different definitions here, which is cool. So let's start with my first questions. And my first question would be, well, maybe an easy one. How do you decide when to automate a particular test and when to rely on manual testing instead? And I'm not sure how I will proceed here, so I just will ask someone to give his opinion. So let's start with Ben. Okay, I will also post the question in the chat, so the panelists may read them, because I talk too much.
Nice. So for me, I always fall back to kind of human-led testing for exploration, where there's information to be learned. So anytime that we don't know the outcome or we want to learn something, I will always fall back to that kind of human-centric testing. But we can use automation to support that. So the interesting thing here is I just don't think it's one or the other. It can be both at once. So just because we're doing human-led testing doesn't mean we can't use tools. We can't create scripts to support that exploration. I think kind of that definition of manual or automation is a challenging one, or rather one I would challenge, because I think that it's a trope, a myth that we can bust. It's not one or the other.
So you can bounce if somebody wants to reply on this, please feel free. So if not, then I will ask the question to someone else of the panelists. Any thoughts on this?
So I think there's a risk that we are agreeing on the myth part here. So I don't know how much we want to say on that one, but maybe since I now started speaking, I would maybe mention that the whole question made me think of this roadmap, test automation roadmap that I saw just yesterday or 2 days ago. And there's like 6 months of Jira tickets and an order in which we would implement them in one of my teams. And that is so definitely not the way that I would choose what I would test first whenever creating automation. So I'm very much of a learner kind of school in the sense of it doesn't matter what you do something small that does some real work for you. And if it doesn't do real work for you, throw it away and do something else next. And when you start discovering what does real work for you, that's how you know where you go and look for the next thing to do. So I would never, ever look for the right thing to do first, other than this is something that I can do or my team can do right now, and I think it would be useful. And over-analyzing and creating all of these plans is generally, that's not the route to success in my experience, let's say it that way.
So automation, like I said, is a way of adding efficiency to your testing. And that's where you can use code or tools. Now, general conception is that you write some tests, call them manual tests, and then convert them into scripts that can be run by a machine. But I think automation can help you do much more than that. Whether it is, generation of test data, whether it is analysis, whether it is reporting, you can use automation for a whole lot. So basically, it boils down to how you want to make your process, make your testing more efficient, get more out of it. That's my way of looking at it. So narrowing it down to certain tests, this or the other, doesn't work for me. It is never an either-or situation. Automation is a tool to make you efficient, and it is always complementary to the testing done by humans. So that's what I would say.
I think there's just so much I agree with what everyone said there, but I think in a practical term, so if you were coming to this world and part of a team and trying to understand, is there a process or something that could be useful for me? I know something that Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin are promoting, and they have a new course all about continuous delivery for a DevOps quality culture. And in that course, they mentioned a particular one-page something called a test suite canvas by Ashley Hunsberger. And that just gives, rather than giving detail on everything and planning everything out, it's just some questions you can ask yourself for whether there's merit in automating everything. So I definitely think the premise of having all of your regression manually scripted and then saying, oh, we want to automate all of that, that's not the right approach. There is definitely some attributes that your test can have to make them probably better candidates than others. Angie Jones has a fantastic video on how she approached this when she was at Twitter. I'll post the links in the chat.
Okay, I think we have a first audience question here, and I find this interesting. So when we want to decide on what to actually automate, on what test case I want to automate, and Shailendra asks, yeah, what if I figure out that the test case becomes more complex to automate than I thought initially. So how would you approach this?
So this is an interesting question. So that means that you've started automating and then you hit the roadblock. So instead, how about doing a feasibility study first, a feasibility analysis of what is feasible to automate, what is not. If you do that analysis up front, it saves you a lot of effort down the line, right? You have a clear idea, clear understanding of which are the situations where you can apply automation to and which are the areas where you cannot. Now, more often than not, what happens is what, like Shailendra said, I mean, teams start automating and then they hit a roadblock saying, oh, this is too complex for me to handle, or this needs more of human intervention than I expected. Well, you should have gauged it up front, is what I think is a more amicable approach to this. So my recommendation is to always do a feasibility study first. Try and look at, the pieces that are available for testing, and then, look at it objectively from the perspective of getting it down to what are the elements of automation that I can apply, where I can use automation to great effect. Now, it need not be restricted to just regression. It could be progression testing as well. For example, in sprint automation. So, it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on your context. It is certainly depending on the complexity that you're dealing with the changes that are going into your product, the frequency at which things are changing, the frequency at which things may fail. All of these considerations you have to, keep in mind, and maybe then you decide what can be automated and how much can be automated.
But isn't it a feasibility study if you try doing it and you figured out that your skills and your knowledge right now isn't sufficient to doing that? Isn't the next step in trying to do that then kind of like, going to someone who maybe knows more? I used to go to Twitter, but now I go to Mastodon and I ask around, and I always find someone who is very helpful and lovely. I have lovely colleagues at work. I pair with the developers, and whenever I hit a roadblock on like, oh, I don't know how to automate this, it's usually that they don't tell me how to automate it. They tell me why I shouldn't be automating that, and they give me a feature that enables me to automate the thing that I had in mind in a completely different way. But if I didn't start my own steps and get stuck on something, I wouldn't know that this is something that I care about, or I wouldn't kind of like, be investigating about the ways that I could do this or the way that I feel about it. So I think actually every single day of us implementing this, it is the feasibility study. And I personally, looking around me, the biggest problem is that we do so much of studies, at least in my organization, that we don't do any of the real work. Like there's a plan and study for everything, but there's no automation in those teams that actually would be doing the work. And that's kind of the shift in the world that I'm looking for, that I'd like to, fail a little more in doing things and try to be a little less safe in the planning. So I feel like we are, not quite on the same page on this one, Brijesh. Maybe we have different projects. I'm in product development. It might be that you have a very different context and experience or expectation in mind with your advice.
I kind of agree with you on your approach of starting to do something and then hitting a roadblock and then collaborating. I would start with collaboration up front. I would work with my developers and do the feasibility study along with them. That's what I would do. I would recommend. It's you venture out, you try to do things alone. That's a good idea. That's definitely allows you to learn more. That allows you to explore more. That's certainly a good approach. However, in situations that I have dealt with, I have begun by, starting to sit with developers, architects, trying to understand what is going on. What are the things which are easy, identify the low-hanging fruits first for automation. And say, okay, these are the ones which can be easily automated. Now, these are the ones which can pose a challenge, and these are the ones which cannot be automated at all. Okay, for the ones which may pose challenge, then we discuss around what can be the workaround, what are the different mechanisms, do we need any third-party support, is there somebody else we can involve, maybe a designer, who can make design changes, uh, all of those steps. So yeah, that's kind of my way of looking at it. But yeah, what you suggested is definitely a good approach.
I love this discussion. I'm going to jump in, not because I particularly disagree, because I think these are two parts of the same debate and they're fantastic. It's more to add I kind of follow similar things, but with much less subtlety. So I follow kind of the Mythbuster approach of failure is always an option. So I just I try and run my kind of approach to the work that I do as experiments, and just assume that some of the things I will try and do will fail, and allow them to fail. Of course, what you do after that is exactly the things that you've just described of, you go get help, you collaborate, you choose the next thing to do. Maybe you can get the same benefit from some other way. So that's exactly the right thing to do next. But like, to straight up answer your question, yeah, I just follow the Mythbusters approach. Failure is always an option.
So, Beth, do you have any final words to this to add to this discussion? This question.
No, other than that, I'm really enjoying it.
Okay, so I don't see any more discussion in the chat, so I will just do with them. Okay, I think we answered a question I had there. So maybe do something like, what is one of the biggest challenges you have faced when implementing test automation, and how have you overcome it? I will post it again in the chat. So maybe you can answer, Beth.
I think, as with a lot of things, we tend to assume that the challenges will be technical, and they tend to be more around people. So the challenges that I come across can usually be resolved with good culture and communication, and that's often the thing that is hardest to find. It's often the elephant in the room that is lacking. Other things can be overcome with good comms, with good culture, with a nice psychologically safe space, like Ben was saying, where it's safe to fail and experimentation is part of the process. Yeah, I think that's what boils down to a lot of things with me. I also find more of the silver bullet approach, where automation is insisted upon by people who've never really explored it and think it is the answer to all the problems, and don't understand that it comes with its own set of challenges, and there's maintenance and there is overhead and things to work through. So kind of fighting that misunderstanding of what automation is also another challenge to be overcome, and to hopefully try and face that up front, to avoid the dreaded having to can something and rewrite it or abandon it whatsoever, because that's such a huge shame when that happens. So that's how it's worked for me. How does anyone else feel?
Biggest challenge, well, dealing with a manager who says, let's automate everything. That's a lot of times that's the case. There are many who believe that automating everything is the solution. It is probably, like Beth said, the silver bullet to all your problems. And that belief is, I don't know from where it comes, but a lot of people seem to carry that. And there's this bandwagon effect where everybody wants to jump in the bandwagon, and everybody says, oh, this is working for them, let's do it as well. They don't care about their own context. Okay, they don't see that, okay, that may have worked in their context, but it is not necessary that it will work in your context too. They miss this point completely. So dealing with that is a huge challenge. So a way to get around it is to educate people about what values automation brings in and how your teams will benefit, which are the areas which can be automated easily, target those first, and which are the areas which are rather difficult and you may hit a failure, target them, but yeah, look at them in a different way. I mean, use more of your collaborative skills, your communication to get around that. So yeah, those are the big challenges that I face, and I face them all the time. Every organization, every team, there is this one person who believes, oh, let's automate everything. Let's do it.
I'm going to jump in with a more technical level answer, just because I think those covered very nicely some of the other points that I probably would have made as well. And that is like one of the problems that I have, again, one of the biggest challenges is getting the system into the right state to start my my actions, right? Like in terms of if you split up automation into, roughly speaking, that arrange, act, assert to kind of get the system into the right state, carry out some actions, do some assertions. That first bit, getting the system into the right state, usually involves speaking to 3 or 4 teams, understanding loads more of the system than I knew about before, leaning really heavily on Docker, changing the product in some way so that it can be controlled in a way that it wasn't before. Like, to me, the actions and the assertions are usually relatively straightforward. Really understanding that the system is in the state you want it to be to start from, that's difficult every time. And I'm going to be straightforward. Apart from making models and learning more about the system and just speaking to people, I haven't found a really good repeatable way to solve that problem. I find it hard every time. So I am super open if anyone has good solutions to that, because I want to learn.
I think my biggest challenge is it's kind of like there's this moment of someone being successful with automation, and overnight that success turning into a complete failure. Like that dualism in automation, I think, is one of my biggest challenges. So I had this one tester in my organization. He was the first one to start automating in the organization, and he was generally known as kind of, the person who has been working on this over a decade, like 10 years of good experience and good contributions. And then he decided to change company. And from the perspective of organization, that was an overnight success to a failure, because there was no one to continue after him. And I think that's the biggest challenge of kind of like how you build automation that survives generations of testers, because that is the world that we are building in software development, that we want to be able to move away, and we want our successes to stay when we are no longer staying. So I think that's the biggest thing that I'm still trying to solve and figure out. And I'm a big believer that the solution for this is the whole team automation, and kind of like having it not as a tester's job, not as a pair of testers' job, but the entire team sharing. And sometimes it means that I have to walk away from some of my favorite work so that others get to practice my favorite work.
So that feeds perfectly well into my next question. So when you said you're moving away with the build automation and nobody could succeed, so does every tester has to be a coder in the future?
That's way too much to say. Like, there's so many of us and there's so many different kinds of us. So I don't think every. And again, like at least my go-to answer on this one is always this idea of if this industry doubles in size every 10 years, half of us have less than 10 years of experience. And probably in that less than 10 years of experience, there's going to be different ways of starting contributions. And sometimes some of the testers don't even know that they're testers. So this whole concept of acceptance testing in business-oriented systems organizations, there's a huge number of testers who are paid less than us testers because they're not called testers, but their work is actually 100% testing.
So much great truth right there. This is brilliant. I have a slightly controversial point to add to this. I think the future is that every coder will also be a tester. I think that it's already true that more coders are testers than we give them credit for. Does that leave room for specialized testers? Yeah, I think it absolutely 100% leaves room for specialized and experienced testers. I don't think that excludes the need for that. And moreover, in my personal experience, yes, I can contribute to test automation. I've been doing a bit today. But like as an overall thing, and yes, I appreciate I'm biased because I'm a tester who could code. Generally speaking, as I join new teams and I work with them, it isn't the technical, it isn't the writing code that they need me to do. That's not the gap that I generally fill. So I tend to find that it's useful to have that skill and it brings usefulness to the role that I'm doing. But it's usually like 10, 20% of the overall role that I'm actually doing as a quality engineer rather than 100%. So when we say coder, yeah, it would be great if loads of testers knew something about code, but will it become 100% of all testers' job? Not a chance. And it already isn't.
Is it the programmer's job to do 100% code? I don't think so.
Absolutely. No, yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah, exactly. We're not. If in fact, so much so, the normal complaint I hear from developers on a regular basis is, oh, I wish I could write some code today, but I've got to do this and I've got to do that and I've got to do the other. It's like so little code gets written to build a product. I think people would be shocked if they knew how little lines of code actually get written or how few tests get written and automated. Compared to like the total amount of time we spent.
Yeah, I think it's easy to overfocus on it. I absolutely agree. And I think the overfocus on it is almost exclusionary. It creates a barrier or kind of smoke and mirrors that stops otherwise fantastic people from starting in this industry. And I think as technology becomes more abstracted, you know, we see the advance of chat GPT and we see the advance of AI. I mean, advance, I use that term cautiously, but it may become the case that just as I haven't needed to learn how to code in binary, one generation down the line, they might not need to learn how to code in Java or JavaScript. I think we ignore the advance of technology that will benefit everybody, not just the techies, at our peril, really, because that may be where things are headed. So it might be a good thing that technology is getting easier for everyone to access and make something useful with.
Well, I kind of like what Ben said about every coder doing testing. That's like the ultimate dream. However, you know, if you look at the job descriptions for testers these days, you know, you would believe that every coder or every tester must learn coding and a set of tools. So, you know, that's where the problem begins. And I talk to a lot of young testers and everybody has the same question. Well, do I need to learn automation? Do I need to learn coding? Do I need to be a super programmer? You know, because if I look at the interviews, especially in a job market like India, where, you know, every tester has to go through 2 or 3 coding challenges for a tester's role. And they're not easy. Okay. In fact, the first 2 or 3 rounds of interviews are generally coding rounds where, you know, if you fail, you're gone. You're not even considered. So I constantly challenge that. I said, do you want testers or do you want toolsmiths? If you are looking for toolsmiths, then you would say it out in the job description. We are not looking for testers. We are looking for people who can work with tools, who can write code and make things work. Say it out loud, but they are not saying that. They say that we need testers and then they complain, oh, the people we interviewed, they know how to write code, but they cannot test. So you can't be on both sides, right? You can't speak from two sides at the same time. Either you decide who do you want. Do you want a tester? Do you want testing skills, or do you want coding skills? So that
I want
is
both. I want both, and I am not going to be happy with one or the other. There are people with both, and I can take either one of them and train the other one. And I do that on a regular day-to-day basis, and I'm not going to give up on that. And every single person in this world can learn how to code enough to write tests. It's the simplest possible programming, especially when you have a team around doing some of the more complicated stuff. So I can't. I can't accept that future.
Well, Maaret, yeah, I also learned coding,
I know.
so I can endorse what you're saying. I learned coding. It was not the fancy automation tools that you're talking about. I learned Perl scripting. It saved a lot of time for me. Now, is that automation? It is. I learned macros in Excel. Is that automation? It is. So, like I said in the first sentence, it's about adding efficiency to your work. You have to find ways to do it, and automation can help you in more ways than others. A simple example, there was a situation when we were testing these storage devices which required multiple reboots. Now every time you have to reboot, you have to go to the lab, do the reboot, come back. And in a situation where we were working from India and the lab was in the US, how do you do that? You can't have somebody sit in the lab and do reboot each time. So we wrote 10 lines of Perl code, which would do the reboot, and it'll do the flag whenever the machine is back up again. So it was that easy. So automation or coding knowledge definitely helps. And Maaret, you're absolutely right. I mean, everybody can learn that.
I think where this works well is where people are in companies and they're learning and they're advancing and they're doing it. Like, people do it, right? They just will pick up a tool, they'll pick up code, they'll do it. Where this is badly broken is recruitment, right? Whether that's people asking for things that make no sense, or whether it's interviews and filtering that get rid of good people needlessly, right? And I think that works in all directions. But yeah, I think really the root of this problem is recruitment for testers who can code and test is so broken because we ask for the wrong things. Because people can do it, and it's not a myth, and they're not unicorns. But the expectations we set are wrong and they're weird. And I think that it's the recruitment that's broken. I don't think we should give up on our dreams, Maaret, but we should definitely give up on crap recruitment.
Well, no, for that, Ben, I have had recommendations, for recruiters to learn testing and about automation before they start the recruitment process. You learn about testing, you learn about automation, and only then you qualify as a recruiter for testing. Otherwise, you don't. It's as simple as that. You can't have somebody who has no idea of testing writing out job descriptions and getting into the recruiting business.
Has Beth solved recruiting already?
So I'm just going to put my hand up right here and say, I have failed a coding interview for a testing job before.
Oh, I have failed as well, multiple times. So
yeah, just in case anyone's there thinking this is a theoretical thing. Yeah, 100%. I've gone for a testing job and go, I'll give it a go. And but this coding interview for the testing job was nothing to do with test automation. It was a pure off-the-shelf tool for implementing some kind of algorithms with some kind of time-based thing. I'm like, yeah, I mean, if this is the kind of code you want me to write when I get the job, I don't want that job. So I'm glad you filtered me out. Goodbye.
I failed at writing a bubble sort program, and I don't know where they were going to use it in the product development.
I have had companies fail me in putting me through experience I didn't like during recruitment and refusing those jobs because of what they wrangled me through. And I would hope that's the experience that everyone eventually gets in this industry, that we get to a place where there's enough work and enough places that we can really look for the place that feels right for us and the right kind of hurdles to jump in order to find that employment.
Okay, so when we are talking about recruitment, that's perfect. So this brings me to my next question. I wanted you to answer me. So how would you respond to the argument that test automation is ultimately a way for companies to cut costs and reduce headcount rather than improving the quality of their software?
Never works. Never works.
Beth was a little bit quiet there, so maybe let her start.
Yeah, Beth. Yes.
Yeah, I think kind of chewing over this question, I think it's important to kind of look at automation as something that augments what you're doing. It doesn't replace you, and it won't replace the future roles on your team necessarily. So to try and back that up with a touch of research, I'm reading a brilliant book here. I'm not here to plug anything, but this is a really nice book by a lady called Anne-Marie Imfidden, called She's in Control. And in that, she cites some research from the World Economic Forum all about the future of work, because it's not just us that's having this conversation about automation taking over people's jobs, right? This is ubiquitous in the world. And the kind of research they've done tells us that 50% of jobs might be changed by automation, but only 5% will be eliminated. So we need to think about how we can use automation to our advantage and not just be scared of the impact it will have as a potential replacement, because I think the facts don't support that assertion. I think it's something we are scared of naturally. We are scared of it, just like in the Industrial Revolution, they were scared of machines coming and taking their jobs away. But I think it's different, because I think we need to learn how to work with the technologies we're using and use them safely, and use them in an ethically sound way. And that is always going to need people to do that.
There was a gap, so I'll jump in. So yeah, I love how researched you are on this one, Beth. I was kind of just going to say, like, in my experience, it's a myth, and I'm going to go all the way here. Not only is it a myth to say that introducing test automation in itself, in isolation from other activities, saves time, it's also a myth that it improves quality. Again, in isolation without other activities. Okay, so just the test automation itself, in isolation, neither saves time, cost, or improves quality. And as you say, it has to be something supportive of other activities. But further on that, if it's the business that you're working for, if it's your organization's wish to cut costs, save time, or increase quality, think about ways to do those things. And automation isn't the only answer. It might be part of the answer. But rather than panicking that automation is doing the wrong thing, take time to understand what it is your org actually wants and try and solve that problem. Like, maybe there is a genuine problem. Like, as testing quality professionals, we can help solve. Like, there might be ways we can save money or increase quality with or without automation to support that. But I think the way that the argument for test automation kind of cutting headcount as a fear misses the point that maybe there are genuine problems for the company to solve. It just because test automation might not be the silver bullet to solve it, doesn't mean you shouldn't try and help solve those problems. I'm not trying to get rid of all your jobs. Don't worry.
Any more opinions on this?
I think the two first speakers said so lovely things that I don't have anything to add.
I have one small thing to add. The problem, that I see with some of the projects that I've been consulting is that they look at test automation as an isolated piece, and they start it as a separate project altogether, which is not aligned to your product development. The test strategy is far away from the product development strategy, and people are operating in a silo, and that's when you are heading towards disaster. Okay, and then you will say, oh, this did not work for me. I put in so much money. I bought this tool. I got the licenses. I spent so much time in training, but nothing is working for me. It's because you were never aligned. You always thought that it is a separate animal. You treated it differently, and then you've run into this. So, when you want to achieve your goals of improving quality, saving cost, keeping your project or product nice and healthy, you have to have a strategy which is in line with your product development strategy. It cannot be a siloed approach. And the moment you think of it as a separate entity, a separate piece, that's when you are heading towards failure. So that's something to think about.
Okay, thank you. I have a question that is related to this, and this comes a little bit into training and the need for speed. So how can you balance the need for speed and efficiency in testing with the need to maintain high levels of test coverage and accuracy? Anyone of the panelists want to take a shot here?
So I have a slightly spiky opinion on this, and that is, I'm not sure I'd optimize for either of those things by default. Right? I think I kind of reject the premise of the question. So, how do I balance the need for speed and efficiency in testing? It's like, well, maybe speed and efficiency aren't the right things to optimize for. They might be, but that's not where I'd start. I wouldn't start by trying to balance those things. I'd start by trying to work out what are the problems we're trying to solve and what actions we can take to have a positive impact. I do, some impact mapping, some problem analysis. I do something, some kind of modeling or thinking about the situation. I would definitely not start with balancing speed and efficiency as my first goal. That's not where I would come in. Eventually, that might have to be a question to be asked, but it's not the question I would answer.
I find myself framing a lot of the work that we do in terms of kind of like everything is code nowadays, even configurations and environments are code. So in a way, nothing changes if we don't change it. And if we change it, you can see a line of text somewhere changing. And then you have these conversations of when that's not true, and you try to make it true also for those bits and pieces where it wasn't true before. That's kind of been a trend in how I have experienced software development in general in the recent years. And then that means that I don't need to run a test, automated or manual or any kind, if there is nothing that really changes. The previous results, they're like yesterday's milk, they only go sour with change, like change the day, time must go forward. So if I can now slow down the time and I can kind of, control the change so that everything happens sort of in slow motion, I also reject the premise, like none of this is true in that scenario. And I find that in the recent years, I've taken kind of control over the world around me, rather than try to just, live in whatever uncontrolled world I used to come into when I started testing 25 years ago. So kind of like I move a lot more of the pieces around now so that I don't have to live in a world where these are pitted against one another.
Well, if I may just add to that.
Sorry.
if I may just add to that. So, it's for companies to decide whether test automation is your goal, or you want to use it as a tool. If you think that test automation is the goal, and thereby you will do, you will add speed and increase coverage and things like that, then you're looking in the wrong direction. Test automation is a tool. It makes your work easy. It adds efficiency. It makes your work more effective. So look at it that way rather than looking at it as a silver bullet, like Beth said earlier. I mean, it is never a silver bullet. It's not like that, the magician pulls out the magic wand, says abracadabra, and everything is done. No, it never happens like that.
I love that so much. I'd take it further and say, testing isn't the goal. And I know that's a controversial thing for someone who identifies as a tester to say, but testing isn't a goal. It's an activity and a tool we use to, and it's a good one and one we should keep using well to achieve some kind of end goal. Even software development isn't the goal. Even good software development isn't the goal. The goal is whatever value you're trying to deliver as a company, as a product. And I think that it's so easy to forget that, the goal is selling more peas, or the goal is, delivering fresh flowers that turn up on the door on time. That's the goal.
But it is kind of cool still to be able to say and look at my team and say that we have 1,250 tests, and we run those tests on average 20 times every single day, which means that we have quite a number of tests to analyze if they were failing, but they're not. The maintenance stuff is sometimes coming along, and when it's coming along, it's a joy to maintain tests that are actually making us learn things that we would have otherwise missed. So again, kind of when you've already invested in this kind of small scale tailored feedback bits and pieces, which basically a lot of the automated programmatic tests are. Then when those fail, it's not like you're doing the what we used to think of as testing. It's a whole different kind of feedback that just keeps you on the right path.
I would wholeheartedly agree with what everyone said there, and I'd also chip in just to say I'm really glad that people are like you guys are able to have these discussions, because it's a really healthy counterbalance to the stream of information that is almost mis-selling these approaches as, as the silver bullet, as the fix to everything, as the thing that will mean that you don't have to have testers anymore. I'm really glad there's a healthy balance to that side of the debate.
I'll just add one more thing to everything. I mean, I've been a part of teams where people have ended up looking at solving their problems due to test automation rather than actually focusing on the customer's problem that they were trying to solve. So these are self-inflicted wounds in a lot of cases, where you are solving some other problem and you forget completely about the real problem that you're dealing with. So that focus goes missing when you think of automation as something as the almighty, or somebody who would come and just fix things and change things and make your product super nice and things like that. So that belief, that mindset has to change. It's a lot to do with the mindset.
So Brijesh, you took nearly away my complete question I wanted to ask next. So my next question would have been, so if we focus so much on test automation, are we actually harming our software product by not focusing on the right things like design or even development or research, user research?
I would hope it doesn't have to be either or. In a lot of these things, it's kind of yes and a little bit more than the ones that we remember to list. So, yeah.
So I posted a question in the chat. It was actually longer, so I paraphrased it here.
So have a kind of my original take on this when I read the question for this one. It's kind of like testing, and by extension, kind of the use of automation to support testing. It's a very important part. It has a very important part to play in measuring and improving quality, but it isn't the whole story, right? So it's very likely, and I'm really grateful for your story there, because this is a great example of it. Like, it's very likely that some teams have been distracted by focusing too heavily on automation, or generally focusing too heavily on pass-fail testing of any kind, rather than understanding their problems or what they need to optimize for, or solving things. But it's not the automation that's the problem. Like, you can't blame the tool, and automation can be part of and testing in general can be part of the solution. But yeah, I agree with you, Maaret. If it's either or, that's a shame, because it's like and.
Well, I have a story there as well, So I was once working with a manager who used to host a call called red, yellow, green call. So if on a day there were a number of reds reported as a result of your automation tests being run nightly, then he would give a piece of his mind to the testers as to why it's red. And on days when it was all green, it would be like a happy day for everybody. So people have this mindset of looking at it as a color code rather than anything else. You're not trying to learn anything about the product. You're not trying to think of ways where you could improve the product, rather than looking at it just as a pass or fail. Then you have a big problem there.
My favorite color nowadays is watermelon, green on the outside, red on the inside. And finding that takes some investigative work always. And it is a huge part of having automation that does the real work in projects.
So, Maaret, have you tried the yellow watermelon yet?
I have, yes, but it's not the same kind.
Yeah.
I'm triggered by so many stories. That there was a place that I used to work, and there's someone on the call who might understand what I'm saying. We had a lot of people who were dedicated testers. We had 5 different levels of test team. We're talking system test, integration test, performance test, cross compatibility test, people who were proving things at enterprise level, right? And we had these huge systems of behavior models that described the system in great detail. And we had these lengthy test reports and test contracts, and this huge amount of evidence we would generate on a very regular basis, and all this huge amount of effort we put in to communicating the current level of quality of the product at any one time. And every time we got a new build, we do a very, very basic set of does it vaguely work at all tests that we call the basic layout verification test. That would take a few hours for a person to run, and then when you'd done the testing and you said basically yes, this is good for other people to pick up and do more testing on, they said, oh, so can you give us a blob rating between 1 and 5 at your gut feel about where we're at with the product from your few minutes? I'm like, you got all this real information here, and you want me to just give a guess because you can't engage with any of this effort we're putting in over here. And it's like, wow, something is badly broken. We're putting in all this effort, but we have no way to tell you what it means. This sucks.
Okay, I have to jump here. Unfortunately, listening to your stories is always great. We have 5 minutes left, and I want to ask one last question to tie the panel up to the original question. Is test automation friend or foe? And I would ask you all, in regards to the time, to limit yourself to 1 or 2 sentences. And I want to start with Beth.
Okay. I would say automation is a friend, but if it was a person, it would be quite a high maintenance friend. I think, yeah. People, we've said before, the misunderstanding sometimes with automation and the reality are sometimes very different. So yes, it is a friend, but a high maintenance one, a needy friend sometimes.
Thank you. Whoever starts gets next.
Go on. I'll jump in the essence of time. So for me, automation is a friend. And like any good friend, you need to work on a mutually beneficial and supportive relationship with well-defined boundaries. Otherwise, you will fall out, my friend.
Just for the sake of it, I have to say it's a foe. And it's a foe because when you recognize that you need to pay special attention to it, and you still treat it respectfully and as if it was, somehow valuable in the world, probably you're going to do a better job with it. So that's my choice of today.
Well, automation is definitely a friend, but it's a kind of a friend who likes to be pampered, likes to be treated really well. You would give that friend an extra cookie, or take them to a party once in a while. So it is that kind of a friend. However, you would want to respect it to a level where you get something out of it. And if you're not getting that, then it's no longer a friend. It's more of a foe who's just draining your pockets.
Okay. Thank you all for your statements. I think Ben and Beth and Brijesh, you just talked to each other and gave the same question, answer more or less. It felt like.
How did you know? That was our secret.
Before I wrap it up, I want to encourage everyone to check out our other events. This panel discussion and keynotes and stuff is embedded into a larger theme, which is our hackathon, sponsored by AskUI. Apurva already posted the links there, so check it out. Maybe you can also participate. And thanks all for the speakers. Thanks for giving all your thoughts, your time here, and it was really funny to listen to the stories and also the controversial discussions. I really made a nice experience here. Thanks again for this. And for this, I would wrap the panel discussion up. And thanks again. We will see you.
Thank you so much.